Hello everyone, how's everything going for you guys? I hope everyone is doing well. So, all of you have completed the Postman installation, right? So, let's move on to where we left off, learning about API formats and the different parts of an API. So, let's see this. Here you can see different types of Google Maps API. So, I have shared the relevant links in the group. Let's revisit Find Place API. Do you remember what we discussed about the URL structure? So today we are focusing on the structure. So here is the URL, Google maps.googleapis.com. So here the base URL, which is the server address, is www.maps.googleapis.com/maps/API. The endpoint is starts after the base URL. So which is place/find place format from text. The output format defines the response format. For example, that can be JSON or XML, etc. The parameter is which that starts after the question mark. Okay. So the base URI is also called Universal Resource Identifier. This part rarely changes. The endpoint defines what the API does, and the parameters refine the request further. Remember, the API communicates with the relevant server. For example, Google API fetch data from Google server, not Facebook server. Do you understand that? Now, let's talk about how file path works. For example, here you can see it is a Google Find Place request. Uh, for example, if you're working on your server, you are in your server. This is the file path. After accessing the server, we request the maps folder. So we are asking the system to go to the maps folder and then go to the API folder. So then after going to the API folder, we go to then it goes to the place folder. And finally select the file name, find place from text. Do you get my point on how this file path works and how the system works? At first, this is the server, then the second part is a request to go onto the maps folder, then the API folder, then the place folder. Finally, to the file, find place from text. It means that we are looking for a specific file named find place from text. Clear so far? So this part is called the endpoint. So what does the file path refer to? It refers to the location of that specific file where it is stored. So now let's move on to the another topic, which is parameters. So a parameter is like when you are searching for something very specific. For example, if you want to know about Tom Cruise, you might search for Tom Cruise recent images. There are many actors with similar names, so you filter your search to specify exactly what you want. Similarly, if you are looking for restaurants, you specify the location and type of restaurant. So the system understands exactly what you are looking for, right? When you filter your search, you're using parameters. So here we can see the parameter is the fourth part. So now how do you identify a parameter in a URL? We said it always starts after a question mark. Parameter will appear after a question mark in the URL. So when you see a question mark, you know that what follows are the parameters. These parameters specify what you are filtering for. The output format, whether the result comes in XML or JSON, is another important thing to note. JSON is the most common and easiest format for API responses. So after looking at the URL, can you tell me which part is the server address, which part is the file path, and which is the output format, and what is the parameter? Okay. So let's break down the URL. So it can be max API place from text, which is the file path. Find place from text. So it is the server. So the part before the first slash is which is the which is for example www.example.com is the universal resource identifier or URI. Then the file path is the path after the server address. Then which is the server address specifies the path to the resources. It is map slash API slash place slash find place from text. Then the output format is JSON, meaning the result will be in JSON. The parameters are the things which are after the question marks. We have parameters. For example, fields equals name, geometry, and input equals students are parameters. These tell the system exactly what information to return. Now let's talk about differentiating the parameters. You can identify parameters not only by the question mark but also by ampersand, which is this. Anything after a question mark on an ampersand is a parameter. Parameters help us filter exactly what we want from the database. Let's move on. We also have different methods on APIs. Have you ever heard of them? The most common methods are get, post, put, patch, delete. So the get method is used to retrieve information. For example, When you search for product or for information, you are using the get method to fetch it from the server. The post method is used to create or add new information. For example, when you sign up for an account, you are creating a new entry in the database, which uses the post method. Then, for example, mm, which uses the post method. Then comes the put method. This method is used to update existing information. For example, when you change your profile details, it updates the entire data. Then comes the patch method. Similarly to put, but it updates only the specific fields you want to modify, not the entire data. Then that comes the delete method. This method is used to delete existing data from database. Let me explain the difference between get, post, put, and patch with examples. For example, when you go to an Amazon store, okay, and write Google and go to new releases, you are just fetching information that already exists. You are using the get method to retrieve it without changing anything in the backend. Now, if you were to create an account on a website, you are providing new data, like your name, email, etc. The system would store the new information into the database using a post method. So when you sign up, you are using a post method. Now let's say you are on Facebook and you want to change your name. You want to update your profile. In this case, you use the put method because you are replacing the entire profile data. The put method will replace the complete data with the new one. Okay, so suppose your name is Samia. Password is 1234. So using the put method, you update database. However, if you just want to update your name and leave the rest of the profile as it is, you use the patch method. The patch method only modifies the specific fields but not the entire field. Okay. Now the delete method is pretty straightforward. If you want to remove any information from the database, you use the delete method. Now let's open Postman and start experimenting with this method. I will show you how to use them practically. So first create a workspace into the Postman. So you can go to the create workspace or uh, use existing workspace in the Postman. So you can use this, rename your Postman and create a new account. Okay. After creating the account, uh, let's go to the website which is www.rest.in. So here there are some limited APIs on this website that we will be practicing with. Could you all access this website? If you can get into rest.in, please scroll down and let me know. So I have just created the workspace for you. So tell me now when you are done. So this is where we will practice with some free APIs. So after that, here every method returns different items. Now do you see that the request API? This is called the endpoint. Yesterday we learned that APIs are generated before the UI, right? So for example, when you click on the login button, the API receives the request, converts it into JSON format, sends it to database and responds back in JSON format. You see the result in English, like logged in successfully, etc. This is how it works when the UI is there. So, this is how it works when the UI is there. But what happens when the UI is not there? So, if the UI is missing, behind every button there is an API that's linked to it. So, the question is, how do we test them? For example, if you are searching for music and it's showing no results, like something unrelated, medikits, for example, is that working properly? No, it's not. So that means the API is not functioning correctly. So when do we do API testing? What do we check? We check status codes and responses. So you need to check the status codes and validate the responses. Do you remember the HTTP code status? Yes, the 400 series is important to remember. That's one thing. The second thing is the response needs to be validated. We test APIs with methods like get, but when the GUI graphics user interface is missing, the developer will give us the API endpoint or URL to test a particular feature. Okay, so suppose the first is status code, then validate response, login, API, JSON, then database. Then it again goes to JSON, then log in API URL. So here we can see that its status code is needed for API testing and validating responses. Then after you logged in, it goes to API, then into JSON format, and it goes to database to figure out the results. And again, it goes into JSON format and shows you that it has logged in. Okay. Now let's go back to the website, request.in. From there, the website, from this website, we understand that this part is the endpoint. It remains at the end of the URL, right? Now let me show you how to handle it. So after selecting the get method, it shows this result. If I click on the endpoint, you can see the whole URL. If you click on it, you'll see the entire link. When you click on the endpoint, it gives you the full URL. Now you will perform this task on Postman. Now this is part is the URI or service address. So did everyone catch that? Good. Now you can see here there is page number 2, page 6, and total pages. This there is information like email address, first name, last name, etc. here. So here's the question. If there is no data, is there any reason to create a table? What do you think? No, exactly. Just like in SQL, you create a table and insert data into it. If there's no data, there's no endpoint, you create a table. So if you see a page with no data, it means it's a bug. So always check the response to ensure that if there is a page, there's data on it. So if the page is empty, it's a bug. So let me repeat one more time. In SQL, we create a table, insert information into columns. Uh, but if there's no data, there's no point in creating a table. Now let's look at the response in Postman. If the status code is 200, that means everything is okay. And we can see the data. But if there's no data, it's a bug. We can see this in Postman. Now let's move forward. So in Postman, we need to create a collection. This is important because when you work with multiple APIs, you need to organize them. For example, after 3 months, if the UI hasn't been created yet, we will work with different APIs or different features like login, search, and account creations. These APIs can get mixed up, so it's essential to organize them in collection. So let me show you. In Postman, you will click on Create Collection and name it something like build one. Once you do it, let me know. So now let's go back to the request.I. For example, if you want to test this first API, click on it. Then copy the link. After copying the link, go to Postman and click on New. Then select the HTTP request. Okay. After selecting the HTTP request, you can select, wait, um, after that, here is the HTTP request. So after selecting it, you select the get method and paste the link into the request URL section. That's where you will be sending the request. Can everyone do this? Okay. Now let's check the parameter. For example, the page number is given in the URL. We can see page equals to as a parameter. Do you see that? The value is 2. But there's no description in this case. Now let's move forward. After you paste the link and select the method, you will click the send. Okay. So to send the request. When you send the request, the console will show the response, such as ID, email, first name, last name. The status code will be 200, which means everything is working fine. Okay, you can see the status code is 200. So how do we know if there's a bug? You need to check if the status code is correct, and the response should include the data. If the response is missing data when it should be there, it indicates a bug. Remember first, you need to learn the HTTP status code. Once you know the status codes, you can tell the API is working or not. So here are the status codes which I have shown earlier. If you are unsure, you can always refer to HTTP status code documentation. There are different codes for success, redirection, client errors, and server errors. Uh, makes you understand this daily. Okay. So now that you have tested the response, check if the data is correct. If it's not, there's a bug. So do you get my point now? Yes. Now let's move ahead and practice more with Postman. So status code 200 okay means the request was successful. 400 means the client has sent a bad request. And 500 can mean there's an internal server error. So in the Postman tool, you'll see the status code in the response. It's crucial to check the response and ensure that status code corresponds to the type of request you made. Now let's dive deeper into the testing a specific API endpoint. So if you set the parameter to page one, so if you set the parameter to page one, you will respond with and click send. You will get response with something like George at example.com, first name George, last name BL. Now let's test what happens when you request page 100. Okay. After you request page 100, if the response doesn't return any data, this indicates a bug. The server should return empty data. But if the server simply returns a successful code without showing data, it's an issue. Okay. Moreover, if a request made for a page that doesn't exist, for example, say page equals AB, the server should return an error message. If the server doesn't return an error message, there's another one. Okay. So after testing various parameters and responses, you might want to save your work. You can save the test under new collection. For example, after clicking save, okay, click save, then name the collection, for example, get employee info. Then choose the section where you want to store it. For example, where here we can see build one. This helps to keep your work organized, especially when testing APIs for bugs. So when you find a bug, you will need to report it using tools like Jira or ALM. It's not enough to just find issue during testing. You might also document and report it properly. You'll provide details like status code, expected behavior, and actual outcome of the API response. Okay. So when you're performing API testing, you essentially send request to the server and check whether it returns correct data or not. For example, to retrieve employee information, you can use a GET request to fetch data from the database. In short, when testing with the GET method, you are checking if the API responds correctly and returns the right data. So now let's talk about the POST method. So here, after selecting the POST method uh, in the website, it will show you this one. For example, you might say name, Morpheus, and job leader. Once the data is created, the server responds with a 201 created status. Okay, so here you can see there is a after selecting post. Another thing, after selecting post, you go to the body section, select raw, and post select the file type into JSON format. Okay, then click send. After that, it will show that the status is created. Okay. Then after running it, you can also save it using the previous method and changing the name into post method. Okay. Now the put and patch methods are used to update existing data. The put method, when you use the put method, the entire data set is updated. This means if you change one piece of information, the whole data record is replaced. The patch method is more specific and uh, updates only the part of the data that you want to change. It doesn't affect the rest of the records. For example, if you want to change the job title of an employee, you would use patch. And if you want to update the entire employee record, you can use the put method. So here we can select the put method, and after that we can go here and select the entire link. So after copying the endpoint, go to the Postman and select put. In the body section, paste the updated data and send to the update request. So you can select anything and update the data, and it will show 200 OK. So after that, you can also save it using the previous method. So when using the patch method, follow the same steps using the put method. But you only do, but you only need to update the specific field you want to change without affecting other fields. So after copying it, you can uh, paste it here and again you can send the data and save it. Now the delete method is used to remove data from the database. Okay, so For sending a delete request, nobody is needed because you are just requesting the server to remove any data. So once the data is deleted, the server should show 204 no content status code to indicate that the data has been successfully deleted. After that, you can select the save the delete method using the previous one. Okay. So we have it all under one folder, and to the folder that we use to keep the URL of a build, which is known as a collection. Now the question is, do you think that after 3 months when the build will be released, there will be 5 or 6 buttons for the particular software or product? You can just think of a phone. Does it only have 5 or 6 buttons? No, right? We have only practiced these 5 features, but it can have multiple features. Think about Amazon.com. There are buttons, links everywhere, new releases, music. So, whatever buttons will be there, they will always be related to the methods that we have learned. You won't have to deal with any other method apart from what we have already learned. Okay, now how do we know which environment what we are working on, and how do you understand that you need to test the API in different environments? Can you remember what we learned at the very beginning of this course? What yes, the developer environment. So in the dev environment, after writing test cases, what phases or stages come next? Is the testing phase. If you have written test cases, executed different tests, made defect reports, and linked bugs and stories from Jira to Confluence. So, which environment did we work with? Was it Sit environment? No, it was Dev environment. So, after writing, so when you build the software module by module, part by part, that is the Dev environment. After that, when everything is integrated, we move into the system integration, which is Sit environment. In the Sit environment, we combine all the parts and do testing, including automation to check how everything integrates. For example, in dev environment, it took 2 or 3 months and there are 4 sprints. After that, the product is almost ready. Now, in the Sit environment, there will be 15 days for running end-to-end test. What do you mean by end-to-end test? End-to-end test means testing the product from top to bottom. You will rerun all the test cases again, doing smoke testing, sanity testing, regression testing, basically testing every nook and cranny of the product. Once the end-to-end testing is done, we can call it the sit environment. It's sometimes also called it's sometimes also called the QA testing environment. After this, after this, the QA testing environment. After this, the product moves to the user acceptance testing. Can you remember what happens at the UAT? The business people test the product from their side, testing as end user. Then we move to pre-production and production. So each environment can be on different server or hardware. For example, the dev environment on the different server, seat on another, and production on another. Once all parts of the products are ready, we push the production to seat environment according to the QA terminology, which means development or deployment or installation. When the software is ready, after the after running all the tests with no bugs, is deployed to UAT environment where business people will test from their sites. Um, Now we know we'll have different URLs for different environments. Now let's write it down. Okay. So here are different URLs for different environments. So you can identify them by checking the environment name like dev, seat, or UAT. For example, the dev environment, the URL can be something like this. For seat environment, it can be something like this. So which one is the product environment? Yes, the first one, because it doesn't have any dev or seat labels in the middle. It's the live public facing URL. Now, if you have 500, 5,000 APIs under one collection, how would you write the dev environment URLs for all 5,000 APIs? Writing them out manually 5,000 times will be crazy, right? Not possible. So there's a shortcut for this. I will show you how to handle it. Before that, you may encounter different names for environment in different companies. For example, instead of dev, you may see PDX. Instead of seat, you might see SECH. Do you see that? Okay. So to summarize, dev and seat can have different names in different companies, but the key of understanding that environment based on the names they use. And remember, the base URL will change, but the endpoint will always remains same. All right, now there are two ways to manage in the dev environment. For instance, you can duplicate the requests. So you can see here is a duplicate option. It creates another copy to edit easily. So if you want to keep a request in the dev environment, you click duplicate, it creates another copy. So you can modify the URL as much as you can for testing. So to make this process simpler, you can use environment. You can also see after copying the sending the data, it says it couldn't send request because it's the copy of the data. That's why you need to change the URL. Now let's look at the top of the corner of the Postman interface. You will see the environment quick look, an eye icon. Click on it. Then after that, select no active environment and then add a new environment and name it, such as dev environment, which is developer environment. Now add variables like always use capital letter for URI. Then in the initial value, you should write the base URL for the environment. And current value, you should the current value should be left blank. Repeat the above step to create similar for seat and product environment. So here is an example for create add environment and you can write the URI initial value etc. And you can also write for the product environment. You can also delete environment by using the delete function, anything we want. So once the environments are created, replace the hard-coded base URL into your API request with URI with two two brackets. When you switch environments in Postman, the variable URI automatically updates to the appropriate URL. For example, excuse me, you can remove the first part, replace the common part of the API with a URL. For example, remove the HTTPS /prod.request.com API resources with URI API resources. Then select the dev environment and it maps to the dev.request.com. Okay, so here you can see that it's running. After check if the request fails, check if the server exists for the selected environment. Dev and seed environments might not have real servers yet. Product environment typically exists and responds correctly. So if you run the URI, it will not run because the link on the uh, website has only product environment. It doesn't have dev or seed environment. Okay. So you have to write dev and products first for their each environment. So if you have thousands of APIs, update the base URI in the first step itself. This avoids manually changing each API later. Okay, so if you have any questions till now, if there are any issues or errors, you can let me know. So next time we will discuss how to validate API responses. Okay? Till then, take care of yourself.